Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody had a wonderful, meaningful Passover. It's hard to believe that it's over, but we have made it through, and we hope that again it was meaningful with friends and family and community. Um, we are going to, since we had so many restrictions on our diet and our food, we're going to look a little more into food because this week's Parsha is called Shmini. And at the conclusion of the Parsha, it deals with kashrut, keeping kosher. We know that out of the 613 mitzvot, there are three mitzvot that do not have a quote unquote rational reason. Every other mitzvah has a reason that is pretty obvious of why we do it. Whether you agree with it or not, that's a different story. But obviously, the Ten Commandments, do not murder, do not steal, keep Shabbat, they all have fairly rational reasons. But three mitzvot do not. They are simply done because God said so. And we're going to look at one of them, which is keeping kosher. The other two, just to keep you familiar with, are the law of the red heifer, which deals with purity and impurity. And the other is called shatnez, which deals with mixing different materials in clothing. But the most popular one that is an irrational one is called kashrut, keeping kosher. And I want to look at not the minutia of the laws, what we can eat, what we can't eat, how do we eat it, how do we prepare it. That's for a different talk and maybe a whole semester of kashrut learning of halakha of Jewish law. But rather, we're going to look at the reasons given to keep kosher, because some of the reasons given we've always heard for many, many years, but we're going to investigate that a little further. So I want to look at just some of the laws. And it's interesting that right, you can say, for instance, you shall not eat among all the things that swarm upon the earth, anything that crawls in its belly, or anything that walks on fours, or anything that has many legs. You shall, for instance, anyone who eats of a carcass shall wash his clothes and remain impure, all different things of purity and impurity. But after all of these things of what we can and cannot eat, the Torah tells us, Ki Adonai Elohechem. Sorry, give me one second. The Torah tells us, give me one second. The Torah tells us, why should we do this? Because God took us out of Egypt. So immediately it's identifying the laws of kashrut with the Exodus of Egypt again. We just read through the Exodus of Egypt many, many times, but here we are a week after Passover, speaking about kashrut, and we're once again reminded that God took us out of Egypt. And so I want to go through some of these pieces. So I want to read for you something. It says, the Jewish people is not just a faith community. It is not merely a collection of individuals, each longing to connect ourselves spiritually with God. Let's remember that word spiritually. Rather, Judaism is a way of life of a people chosen by God to be a medium of God's vision of holiness and justice. Right? Judaism is a way of life. Halakha, Jewish law, doesn't mean Jewish law. Halakha means talechet. It means to go on a journey. And so the first thing I want to read is, or discuss with us, is called an article by Kashrut and Spirit. And give me one second. Let's get to the commentary. And the question is, what reasons are given for keeping kosher? So the first is from Maimonides, and it is from the Guide of the Perplexed, and it says this. This is Maimonides speaking. It says, I maintain that the food which is forbidden by Jewish law is unwholesome, right? It's forbidden. There is nothing among the forbidden kinds of foods whose injurious character is doubted, except pork and fat. This is Maimonides speaking, referencing Leviticus chapter 11, which is the chapter of kashrut. But also in these cases, the doubt is not justified, for pork contains more moisture than necessary for human food, and too much superfluous matter. The principal reason why the law forbids swine's flesh is to be found in the circumstance that its habits and its foods are very dirty and loathsome. Right? Often you hear, oh, pig is a dirty animal, so we don't eat it. Well, there's other animals also that we do eat that perhaps might be considered dirty. It has already been pointed out how emphatically the law, Jewish law, enjoins the removal of the sight of loathsome objects. We want to get dirty things out, impure things out, and pure things in. How much more objectionable is such a sight in towns? But if it were allowed to eat swine's flesh, say we could eat pork, the streets and the houses would be more dirty than any cesspool, as may be seen at present. As saying is in our Talmud, the mouth of a swine is as dirty as dung itself. That's a quote from the Talmud. The rabbis say that Maimonides sees this as healthy eating, that pork is an exception to the way of living. Because why? It's living in loathsome conditions, and you want to bring that, the way that a pig lives, into the way that we human beings. Healthy. How many people say, can't see you, but a show of hands, right, that kashrut is for health reasons? We can't say that because we know that many people who do keep kosher have the same health problems that people who do not keep kosher with. In fact, the food is so good that it gives us high cholesterol and blood pressure and all those other maladies. However, the medieval Jewish philosophers did try to provide a different reason for keeping kosher that is more spiritual and not physical. Maimonides understands, right, the idea that it's about physical health. But Nachmanides, in his commentary to the Torah, sees something different. He tends to see the dietary laws as beneficial not to the body, but rather to the soul. Nachmanides observes that forbidden animals and birds are predators, so that for a human being to eat of their flesh will have an adverse effect on their character, whereas the permitted animals and birds are calmer and less violent, right? If we eat the predators, then we ourselves, right? You are what you eat. We will become predator-like. But the animals that we are allowed to eat, Nachmanides says, are a little less violent. They're more calm. So he says, as for fishes, those that have fins and scales, they're able to swim near the surface of the water where they can inhale the fresh air. Where the other fish lurk in the murky waters of the deep, their flesh is less clear and refined. This is a teaching by Louis Jacobs, Traditional Teachings on the Meaning of Kashrut, right? So how the animals act in their lives when we eat them, therefore reflects how we perhaps will act in our own lives. You have the cruel traits. We don't want those. We want the more common ones. And so we go to the book of Sefer HaChinuch, one of my favorites, the book of education, which details the different mitzvot. And what do they say is the law of keeping kosher? He says at the root of this law lies the reason that the body is an instrument of the spirit. The body is an instrument of the spirit. They have to go together. With it, carries out its activities. Without it, it can never complete its work. Right? The body and soul work hand in hand. We don't separate one from the other. It is because of this, Sefer HaChinuch says, that the soul comes to take shelter under the body's shadow. The soul is under. For the soul is how good and not to its harm. And God does not evil, but goodness to all. God is goodness, and therefore our body and soul must be goodness as well. So what does he say? We find that the body at its command is like a pair of tongs in the hands of a blacksmith. With it, he can produce a tool fit for its purpose. Our bodies are a tool that God has the tongs in its hands that we need to fulfill our purpose. Now, in truth, Sefer HaChinuch says, if the tongs are strong and properly shaped to grasp tools in them, the craftsman can make them well. As we know, if the tongs are not good, the tools will never come out properly shaped and fit. In the same way, if there is any loss or damage in the body, some function of the intelligence will be nullified. For this reason, our whole and perfect Torah removed us far from anything that has this defect. In this vein, according to the plain meaning, we would say we were given a ban by the Torah against all forbidden foods. And if there are some among those whose harm is known neither by us nor by the wise men of medicine, do not wonder about them. The physician is wiser than both you and them. So it's this connection between body and soul that we need to take care of this body. And if we don't take care of the body, then the soul cannot perform its function. So you're saying a much different physical reason than what Maimonides said. Kliyakar, 17th century, says this. The reason for the laws of kashrut is not physical health, like Maimonides says. As the Ramban explains, we see that non-Jews, as I said before, eat non-kosher foods and they're fine, they're healthy, they run marathons better than us. Rather, their purpose is for the well-being of the soul. Why? Since unkosher animals remove the spirit of purity and holiness and create a blockage, not in our arteries, but rather in our intelligence. In our intelligence. Finally, before I share with a teaching by Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, one of the great theologians of this time, I share with you a teaching by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who sees our body not just as a body, but rather as a mishkan, as a temple. And the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra, is in fact called the Torah Kohanim, the priestly Torah, and it is a book about holiness. It's the holiness code. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch says, just as the external temple, the synagogue that I'm sitting in, the temple in Jerusalem, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which represents your holy mission, and to which you should sanctify yourself, that will become desecrated by impurity. He says, so are these foods, impure and unfit for your spirit. For all of them, the living place of activity for your own being, which is summoned into holiness. If you have eaten them, not only touch, but absorb them into your system, you may be more nourished and better fed. But the animal instinct will be aroused more strongly within you, and your body becomes more blunted as an instrument of the spirit. Interestingly, he says, if you eat a non-kosher animal, yes, you may have more energy in your physical body, but it is your soul that would be corrupted, if you wish. He says your heart, instead of being holy, instead of only striving for holiness, namely your sublimity over everything animal-like, is drawn down to the animal, or becomes more apathetic and dulled. Your spirit is now faced with a fiercer battle and is less equipped for the fight. For Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, it is all spiritual. It doesn't affect the physical at all. And so I want to conclude or go into a final teaching by Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, who wrote a beautiful new book, actually last year, but I'm reading it now. It's called The Triumph of Life. And it deals specifically with how we deal with life and death in the Torah. And one of those aspects deals with eating. I want to first talk about for a moment what this looks like in real life. If you do keep kosher, or if you had ever kept kosher, or if you're thinking of keeping kosher, how does it add that holiness to your life? I think we see it best on Pesach, where we have to make very intentional decisions about what we eat, right? When we're going through the world during the year and we have many options in Los Angeles, it's very different than different places. Where I grew up in upstate New York, first there was one kosher restaurant, then there were no kosher restaurants, then there was one kosher bakery as opposed to two. The meat was shipped in by a different city. You had to make intentional decisions in order to keep kosher. Or I remember going to a school that was not Jewish because there was not a Jewish school for high school, and I wasn't on the meal plan. So I had to bring my own lunch, and asking questions or answering questions of my classmates of why I was eating differently than them. I said I keep kosher. And then, of course, what is kosher? And I don't say, oh, I'm more healthy than you, or my soul is better than you. But in those moments, it allowed me to understand my connection to the divine because I was doing something different in a regular day activity. That is what Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg speaks about. He says in this teaching that he gave with the Hadar Institute, kashrut is one of the defining religious practices of Jewish tradition. Over the century, there has been criticisms of the idea of being kosher. He actually quotes the New Testament. Obviously, it was Easter with the resurrection of Jesus and on Sunday. And of course, we mourn the passing of Pope Francis for the Catholic community. And he says, in the New Testament, it says, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. Rabbi Greenberg says, spirituality should be all about nurturing your mind and heart and directing them to meaningful purposes, not about your appetite or supplying nutrients to your body. That's what the New Testament says. Rabbi Greenberg says, no, no, no. Kashrut is different. Kashrut, he says, is an extraordinary paradigm of the Torah's spiritual vision of an ultimate ideal world, we get a lot of these visions, one being Shabbat, right? Shabbat is like the Garden of Eden. The Talmud tells us that if the entire Jewish world would observe 2 Shabbatot in a row, not 2 separate ones, but everybody 2 Shabbatot in the world, then the Mashiach would have a better chance of coming. Kashrut also is this moment where you can see the ideal world. And at the same time, you live in the real world as well, with a higher standing of working towards tikkun olam, of a repair. Underlying this analysis, he says, is a fundamental thesis about Judaism, that this is a religion that teaches that the highest value is life itself, and that we as human beings are called to join in a covenant partnership with God to live on the side of life. He says, starting in the present real world, we are to develop life to its maximum. We are to work to improve both nature and society to uphold all forms of life. The human calling is to maximize life and minimize death in every action to whatever extent possible. So then you might be thinking, why are we eating animals? And so he says, eating is a matter of life and death, right? If we do not eat, he says, then what happens? We can't fast forever. We will die. However, it says what we choose to eat and how preparing the food can increase the quality of life in our eating. Therefore, the Torah regulates food and its preparation to shape the experience of eating. For those of you who do not eat meats, Rabbi Greenberg is correct. He says the ideal of eating is vegetarianism, that a person should not live by killing another sentient being. In the Garden of Eden, what happens? We were not just humans, but like all living creatures. We were vegetarians. I was speaking with a young man who's going from a Jewish school to a non-Jewish school next year, and he was asking his parents, how shall I explain what it means to keep kosher? How shall I know what's in that food that they are giving to me? The Torah tells us in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 29, God said, I have given you all every herb-bearing seed and every tree on which its fruit to you for food, and every beast on the earth and every bird of the air to everything. On the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. According to Isaiah, when the Mashiach comes, what does it say? The wolf shall live with the lamb. Not just humans should be vegetarians, but even animals. The calf and young lion and the faulting together. And the lion shall eat what? Hay. They shall eat hay, like the cattle. But Rabbi Greenberg understands the real world as well. And he says the Torah looks down at the human situation. After Noah and the ark and the flood, what happens? God tells us that there is human imperfection, to make concessions rather than uphold ideal standards by force, and to work with humans to repair the world gradually in order to attain the final perfection. That, I believe, is the real message of Kashrut, especially coming after Pesach. We always strive to be in a perfect world, but our rabbis and God understands that in our covenant with human beings and God, that we are not perfect, that we are living in a real world. And so, yes, the ideal might be vegetarianism, and maybe one day it will be. It's interesting how, for instance, things have changed to the Impossible Burger, right? But at the same time, when we do eat that meat, when we do engage with animal life, we do things a little differently. We not only have restrictions, but we are not only looking at the physical, but we are looking at the spiritual. And so this week, when we read about all these different birds and fish and animals that we do have the ability to enjoy their taste, we also think about not necessarily what it does to our body, but what it does to our soul when we make decisions about what we eat, how we bring that oneg, that joy of our lives, to each other, and ultimately in partnership with God. And so this week, we wish you a week of healthy